I was halfway to the elevator when Chad dropped the words like a beer bottle off a balcony. Lazy slacker. Loud enough for the interns to hear, smug enough to make the sales team snort into their branded coffee mugs. I didn't say a word, not because I couldn't, not because I didn't have a scorched earth monologue loaded and ready to fire, but because I knew something he didn't. The moment he signed my termination papers, he just detonated the corporate equivalent of a Claymore mine, aimed directly at his own Gucci loafers. So I stood there, holding a cardboard box filled with 2 decades of thankless loyalty, my ceramic mug with the fading world's okayest COO decal, a plant I hadn't watered in 6 months, and a framed picture of the old man himself, Mr. Albright, shaking my hand after we'd saved the company from bankruptcy back in 2013. Chad strutted off like he'd just neutered a dragon. His teeth practically glowed in the fluorescence. MBA boy, legacy brat, the kind of guy who thinks synergy is a strategy and grit is a brand of protein powder. People pretended not to look. The HR girl actually flinched when our eyes met. My team, bless them, shifted uncomfortably in their ergonomic chairs. Eyes locked on their screens like watching a woman be publicly executed was just another Slack notification. The janitor gave me the only look that felt human. A slow, solemn nod. As if to say, you deserved better. And hey, since 97% of you are listening to stories like this without hitting subscribe, maybe consider changing that. I'm trying to hit my first 10,000 subscribers before I turn 50 and adopt 3 cats out of spite. Help a woman out. Anyway, I didn't cry. That's not my style. I walked out slowly, like my bones weighed more than they used to, like every step away from that building was one I'd earned with blood, budget spreadsheets, and cleaning up after the founder's idiot son. You ever spend 20 years building something just to have some overcaffeinated nepotism nugget toss you out like expired creamer? That's what it felt like. Not tragic, just insulting. The air outside hit like a slap. It was that stupid kind of Ohio spring, too warm for a coat, too cold for defiance. I sat in my car for a long minute, staring back at the company name on the glass, Albright Logistics, EST, 1982. I remembered when that logo was painted on the wall in a leaky warehouse, not laser-cut stainless steel polished by interns too scared to look me in the eye. I didn't scream, didn't throw my box across the parking lot or crank up angry Alanis Morissette like some rom-com cliché. I just exhaled, deep, controlled, the kind of exhale that only comes when you've been holding your breath for 20 years without realizing it. Then I pulled out my phone, scrolled past the text from my sister asking if I wanted to finally try Zumba now that I had free time. Found the contact, Ellen attorney, contracts/employment. Pressed call. She picked up on the first ring. You okay? I'm peaky, I said, deadpan. Activate the clause, a pause, not long, just enough for her to suck in a quiet little breath and understand what had happened. On it, she said. I hung up, leaned back in the driver's seat, stared at the building one last time, and smiled. Because Chad just stepped on the landmine I buried 10 years ago, and he doesn't even know he's bleeding yet. The first morning of unemployment hit like a hangover I didn't earn. I woke up at 6:30 out of pure muscle memory, brushed my teeth with the precision of someone preparing for back-to-back budget meetings, and stood in front of my closet for 10 full minutes before realizing there's nowhere to go. My calendar, once packed tighter than Chad's hairline, was blank. Just a little gray box that said enjoy your day, like a cruel joke from a sadistic algorithm. I sat on the couch in my robe, coffee in hand, and turned on the TV. Apparently, there's an entire genre of daytime courtroom shows where people scream about pet custody and unpaid microwaves. I watched 2 full episodes, dead behind the eyes, before it hit me. I was drifting, floating in corporate purgatory. No emails, no status meetings, no Chad misusing the word pivot like it was foreplay. By the second day, something in me began to twitch. Not grief, not even regret, just a slow, steady boil. I found my old laptop, blew the dust off, and opened the resume file last edited in 2008. It was a time capsule of modest bullet points, oversaw operations for mid-sized regional logistics firm. Understatement of the century. I added a line. Sole reason company survived the 2008 recession while Chad was still pledging frat. Then I went to the kitchen, grabbed a blank notebook, one of those cheap spiral-bound ones you always think you'll use for recipes, and wrote on the cover, evidence. Not dramatic, not even in bold, just evidence. Page 1, Aspen 2022 Leadership Offsite. Actual agenda, skiing, whiskey tastings, and a hot tub incident involving the intern Chad called tax deductible. Page 2, Efficiency Consultants from Wharton. Real names, Bryce and Carter. Spent 3 weeks shadowing staff, then submitted a report that was 72% plagiarized from Harvard Business Review articles. Billed $93,000. I wasn't reminiscing. I was collecting. This wasn't nostalgia, it was reconnaissance. By day 4, the simmer had turned to a low hum in my chest, that feeling you get when you know something's coming, like when the air pressure drops before a tornado. Chad hadn't called. Not that I expected him to, but I knew him well enough to know he was probably in damage control mode, meaning he was blaming interns and posting inspirational quotes on LinkedIn about growth through adversity. Then, just as I was debating whether buying a punching bag was too on the nose, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, no message. 2 minutes later, a text from a contact saved only as Katrina from accounting, one of the last decent ones. They're here, dark suits. No smiles, that's it. No greeting, no emojis, just that. And it said more than a 5-paragraph email ever could. I stared at the message like it was a war telegram. The kind of phrase you don't say unless something seismic has shifted in the foundation. The auditors had arrived, and if they were anything like the ones Mr. Albright and I had contracted 10 years ago during that near collapse, they wouldn't just flip through receipts. They'd pull up carpet tiles, run fingerprint dust on coffee stirrers. They were the type who got excited by unredacted credit card statements and triple entries in QuickBooks. I closed the notebook, put it on the kitchen table like an offering. Then I sat down across from it, folded my hands, and smiled. Let the dissection begin. On the fifth morning, my phone lit up at 7:13 a.m., Chad's favorite hour for ego flexes. I figured it was some LinkedIn post about resilience or a picture of him jogging in branded company merch. Instead, it was a text, and even through the screen, I could hear the smugness in every keystroke. Hope you're enjoying your retirement. Let me know if you need a reference for a less demanding role. Maybe something in nonprofit? Chad, I stared at it, half laughing, half contemplating throwing the phone into the garbage disposal. There it was, his first little power twitch. He was trying to reassert dominance, like a dog humping a throw pillow after losing a fight. My thumbs moved before I could overthink it. I think you're going to be busy, Chad. Focus on that. Send. No emoji, no follow-up, just a scalpel-thin slice across the jugular. 5 minutes later, Katrina called. No greeting, just a hushed voice like she was calling from a hostage situation. They took the main conference room, she whispered, kicked out the client meeting that was supposed to be in there. They brought their own printer. I almost choked on my coffee. Their own printer? Yeah, set it up in like 2 minutes. Full size, industrial. One guy's been scanning receipts since 6 a.m. The other's just sitting there with a yellow legal pad in this. Predatory calm. I leaned back in my chair and let that image sink in. The conference room, Chad's ego bunker, the site of so many meaningless innovation strategy PowerPoints, was now enemy territory. Turned into a war room for men who considered unbalanced ledgers their native language. They asked for everything from the last 2 years, Katrina continued. Expense reports, travel reimbursements, vendor contracts, even the executive suite renovation invoices. Oh, I said softly. So they've found the claw marks. There was a pause on her end, then a shaky laugh. You really did this on purpose, didn't you? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The truth is, I hadn't just left a trapdoor under Chad's throne, I'd left the blueprints to his destruction hanging right there if anyone bothered to look. And now the most meticulous bloodhounds in the industry were sniffing every inch of it. I hung up and went to my notebook. Page 5, company credit card used at the Velvet Antler during Denver Logistics Summit. Confirmed, that's not a restaurant. That's a gentleman's club that serves bison sliders. $1,200 Uber Black charges for client transit on a Sunday to a location 1 block from Chad's condo. Duplicate invoice from Pinnacle Synergy Solutions, Aka Bryce and Carter Scam LLC, billed for executive mindset coaching. Total, $47,000. I wrote each one slowly, carefully, like I was documenting fossils in an archaeological dig of stupidity. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't even angry. What I felt now was something colder, sharper, a kind of purposeful stillness, like a chess player watching the other side scramble after realizing they moved their queen into checkmate 3 turns ago. I wasn't a disgruntled ex-employee. I was a spectator at a demolition I commissioned, front row seat, popcorn optional, and the first cracks in the building had just begun to show. The letter came in a thick white envelope, too official looking to be junk, too clean to be personal. The return address had no logo, just the name of the forensic auditing firm in plain black type, the kind of understated confidence that screams, "We don't miss." I slid it open at the kitchen table with a butter knife, sipped my coffee, and let the legalese roll over me like a hymn sung in corporate Latin. Dear Miss Hawthorne, this correspondence serves as formal notice of the commencement of a forensic financial audit of Albright Logistics, LLC, triggered under the compliance clause outlined in your employment agreement, subsection 12, C, pertaining to termination without cause. I stopped there. That was enough. It was real, not just strategy on paper, not just a clause buried in a stack of old HR files. It had teeth. It had claws, and now it was awake. I set the letter down and felt the strangest thing. I smiled. Not the gloating kind. Not the movie villain smirk you imagine in the mirror after a dramatic monologue. Just a soft, private upward curl of the mouth. The kind of smile you give a storm that finally arrives after 10 years of drought. My fingers traced the edge of the envelope, and just like that, my mind drifted, 10 years backward, to a conference room that reeked of fear and burnt coffee. It was the fall of 2013. Mr. Albright sat across from me, white-knuckled, pale, and sweating through his button-down. The company was days away from default. Our biggest client had just pulled out, and our logistics system had crashed during peak season. Chad was still finishing his undergrad degree in global strategy, or whatever academic fantasyland let him skip a single logistics class. We were two people in a burning building, trying to save the blueprints. You can restructure it, he'd said quietly, voice cracking. You know where every dollar goes. Hell, you know where every body is buried. I can, I'd said. But I'm not going to rebuild this for it to be handed off to your kid who thinks trucks are just big vans. He'd winced. That was the only time I ever insulted Chad directly to his father's face. Albright didn't argue. He just nodded, slow and broken, and said, then let's make a deal. If I ever lose control, if you're ever pushed out without reason, it triggers an automatic audit, not internal, not friendly. A third-party kill switch. You'll be the fuse, I'll be the fall guy if it ever comes to that. He pulled a legal pad toward him and started writing. It wasn't about protecting me. It was about protecting the company, the infrastructure we'd built. The systems, the staff, the goddamn forklifts that kept this whole rickety empire upright. He wasn't blind. He knew his son wasn't a leader. He just didn't want to admit that the heir to his legacy might be its destroyer. So we put it in writing. Back then, I never truly believed we'd need it. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could groom the kid into something passable, or that Albright would never really step back. But now here I was, 10 years later, with the proof of that pact sitting in my hand, printed on thick stock paper, bearing the seal of a firm known for making CEOs cry before lunch. I pulled out the notebook and turned to a blank page, wrote in all caps, "It's happening." Then I poured myself a glass of wine, yes, before noon, and stood in the kitchen, staring out the window at the rain starting to fall across the backyard. The world hadn't noticed yet. Chad still probably thought this was a speed bump, an inconvenience. But that letter was the first domino, and I knew exactly how far the line of collapse would reach, because I helped lay every single one. It was 11:47 p.m. when my phone rang, Chad's name lighting up the screen like a flare in the middle of a minefield. For a solid minute, I just stared at it, wine glass halfway to my mouth, debating whether to let it ring out of principle or answer and enjoy the unraveling in stereo. Curiosity won. I picked up, put him on speaker, and stayed perfectly silent. What the hell is this? He barked before I could say a word. His voice was shredded, raw, not from shouting, but from panic trying to claw its way out through his teeth. They're asking about the Miami lease. What am I supposed to say? They're going line by line through every goddamn document. Who even are these people? I took a slow sip of Merlot. Let the silence hang for just a beat too long. Then I put on my best syrupy sweet tone, kind you reserve for relatives who only call when they need bail money. Oh my, I cooed. That sounds serious. Is everything okay, Chad? He didn't pick up on the tone. He was too deep into meltdown territory. They have a copy of the lease. They're asking why the budget called it a logistics expansion when it's barely zoned for storage and has no active shipments in or out. They said it's unusual that it was approved without a board review. Unusual. God bless forensic accountants and their pathological understatement. I murmured, twisting the wine glass by its stem. I thought that was your visionary strategy. South Florida distribution synergy, wasn't it? The sound he made was part groan, part growl. It was a branding office, okay? A regional visibility hub. I needed a presence down there. You know that? Oh, I knew. I knew that regional visibility hub was located in a luxury, high-rise 2 blocks from a yacht club. I knew the branding team consisted of a girl named Sierra, who posted more bikini selfies than spreadsheets. I knew Chad only went there when he wanted to disappear from corporate responsibility and impress whatever influencer he was currently calling his networking asset. But I also knew he told the board it was going to be the cornerstone of our East Coast freight realignment, that he inflated projected shipping revenue by 800% to justify the $29,000 a month lease, that he called it future-proofing logistics flow while sipping cocktails on a rooftop bar. Chad, I said, lowering my voice like a therapist mid-session, you should probably talk to your CFO. She's useless. I've already got her sweating like a criminal. They pulled her into the conference room for 6 hours. I don't even know what they're looking for anymore. That's the thing about a forensic audit. It doesn't look for something specific. It looks at everything. Like termites crawling through dry rot, they don't stop at the obvious, they chew until they hit bone. I have to go, he snapped, breath ragged. They're coming back at 8 a.m. They want access to my corporate card statements. Personal ones? Is that even legal? Oh, sweetie, I said softly, you should get some sleep. Sounds like you've got a big day ahead. Then I hung up, not abruptly, not cruelly. Just with a gentle click like tucking in a child who's finally starting to realize the monsters under the bed are real. I sat there for a while, phone face down, letting the silence reclaim the room. The wine was warm now. I didn't care. I was warm too, right in the center of my chest, where smug satisfaction had given way to something colder, denser, more permanent. Justice? No, justice was too neat, too clean. This was reckoning. The piranhas were biting now. And Chad was bleeding into the water. The message came in mid-morning, slipped between 2 spam emails and a grocery delivery notification. Katrina, he called him. Albright, the old man. The auditors reached out this morning. I didn't move, just stared at the text while the toaster hummed behind me, forgotten. Then the second ping came. He was on his boat. In the Bahamas, told them Chad's a smart kid. He knows what he's doing. Give him what he needs. I let out a sound, half laugh, half something uglier. Of course he said that. Of course he did. It was vintage Albright, distilled down to the same stubborn loyalty that had once built an empire from rusted trailers and unpaid invoices. The same blind faith that was now letting that empire rot from the inside out. Chad's a smart kid. Smart enough to turn a branding hub into a beachside bachelor pad. Smart enough to funnel consulting fees into a shell company co-owned by his college roommate. Smart enough to put the entire executive budget on his Amex and then pretend it was for mentorship dinners. Give him what he needs. What he needs is a padded cell and a tax attorney. What he's about to get is a forensic colonoscopy so deep it'll find childhood trauma. I sat down at the kitchen counter and stared at the wall, trying to swallow the bitterness that bubbled up. I'd known Mr. Albright for over 2 decades. I'd stood by him through union strikes, system crashes, lawsuits, and a scandal involving mislabeled hazardous freight. I knew his tells, his quiet gestures, his long silences, the way he rubbed the back of his neck when a decision was costing him more than he let on. But this wasn't a silence born of strategy. It was distance, detachment. The kind of shrug you give when you've convinced yourself the worst is behind you and the man at the wheel can't possibly be steering toward a cliff. He was on a boat, for God's sake. Probably wearing linen and sipping something from a crystal glass, while the company he'd spent his life building was slowly hemorrhaging integrity from a dozen wounds his son never even noticed he'd inflicted. And it hit me, in that nauseating, gut-deep way that truth sometimes do, Albright still believed in him. Despite the red flags. Despite the missed board meetings, the inexplicable expenses, the revolving door of consultants who said everything and meant nothing. He believed the narrative he'd told himself ever since Chad was that his legacy had a name and a trust fund and would carry on the business like it was a holy right. That belief wasn't just naive, it was dangerous, because the audit wasn't just about money anymore. It was about rot, systemic, culture-deep rot. And the longer the founder stayed on his boat, trusting the son who was setting the place on fire, the worse the reckoning would be when he finally stepped off. I texted Katrina back, he'll have to believe the math. Eventually. Another buzz, they're digging deeper. Someone mentioned an internal invoice chain that doesn't match the payroll logs. Consultants getting paid for work that doesn't exist. I closed my eyes, inhaled. That's how it always starts with ghosts in the books. Payments without projects, names without bodies. The kind of clues that, once stacked together, form a pyramid made entirely out of lies. The suspense wasn't whether Chad would get caught. It was whether Albright would let himself see it in time. And if he didn't, well, the crash would be biblical. It started with a screenshot. A grainy, half-cropped image of an internal memo sent from someone too spooked to put their name on it. No preamble, no subject, just a message in my inbox with the body text, "You were right." The memo was from the auditors, flagging a vendor listed as Orion Logistics Consulting LLC that had received over $300,000 in consulting fees over the past 14 months. No social presence, no website, no listed employees beyond a single managing partner. Chadwick T. Albright. The dumb bastard named himself the managing partner of his own fake company. Registered it in Delaware, because of course he did, and funneled contracts through it using executive override codes I personally revoked 3 years ago and he secretly reinstated when he took over. The memo was meant to stay internal, but office walls leak faster than spreadsheets, and by lunchtime the building was hissing like a punctured tire. My phone vibrated once, then again, then in a steady, fevered rhythm like a defibrillator trying to restart a flatline. Jenna from legal, holy hell. Set up a shell company. Okay, Katrina, they just pulled HR in. Nobody's making eye contact. Ravi from IT, sorry I didn't believe you before. Unknown number, is it true he billed the company for consulting with himself? The tone shift was seismic. Just days ago, I was the ousted relic, the dinosaur no one wanted to cross but everyone quietly pitied. Now, I was the ghost at the feast. The name spoken in whispers. Woman who knew everything before it cracked wide open. And Chad? He called me 5 times, I didn't answer. He left voicemails, rambling ones. The first, still cocky, asking if I'd heard the rumors and telling me it was nothing, just corporate politics. The second, more frantic, asking if I had any paperwork that might explain things. The third was quieter, more breath than voice. The fourth I deleted without listening. The fifth was just, please, just call me. I slid my phone into a drawer, got in my car, drove to the only liquor store in town that stocked the bottle I'd been saving for something, that 2008 Krug Closed Du Mesnil. The kind you buy not because it tastes better, but because you want to feel the weight of the cork in your hand when you pop it. The cashier raised an eyebrow at the price. I smiled and handed over my card. I wasn't drinking it yet, but I was getting ready. The collapse had begun, not in theory, not in metaphor, but in facts and bank transfers and paper trails he never thought anyone would follow. And I had front row seats. I didn't want an apology. I didn't even want vindication. I wanted clarity. I wanted the world to see what I saw, that all his ambition, all his speeches, all his fast-talking boardroom nonsense was just a sugar coating over a hollow man with a taste for power and no spine to hold it. That bottle sat on my kitchen counter like a crown. I'd open it when the final signature hit the final report, and toast to the audit not as a punishment but as a damn miracle. The text came in at 3:42 p.m. Katrina, he knows, just that, 2 words, but I stared at them like they were carved into stone because I understood exactly what they meant. The second call had happened. The founder had picked up his satellite phone, probably still aboard that floating denial machine docked off the coast of the Bahamas, and heard, in clinical, irreversible detail, that the company he'd entrusted to his son was bleeding out. And the wounds weren't from the market, or the economy, or post-pandemic volatility. No, the knife was internal, personal, and it had Chad's fingerprints all over the handle. The auditors had waited until they had something airtight, something that couldn't be shrugged off as strategic expenses or forward-looking investments. They gave him the full spread: bank transfers, shell corporations, double-billed invoices, contract loops leading straight to Chad's fake LLC. Everything connected. Clean, cold, indisputable. I wasn't on that call, but I didn't need to be. I knew Mr. Albright well enough to picture it frame by frame. Him standing barefoot on the deck, staring out at endless blue, holding the phone a few inches away from his ear like that would soften the blow. The auditor's voice is flat and professional, because they've delivered this kind of death sentence before. And then the silence, longer than any spreadsheet could measure. Because how do you process that the person you built a legacy for is the same one who's been gutting it in secret? I imagined his hand shaking. Not violently, just enough for the glass he was holding to ripple. Maybe he poured a drink. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he just sat there and let the sun beat down on a truth that had been circling for years and finally landed like a stone on his chest. He knows. I read it again. And I didn't smile. I didn't gloat because this wasn't a victory. This was a funeral for a belief system. The mythology of the golden sun shattered. The illusion that Chad, for all his bluster and buzzwords, would one day step up and find his footing gone. This wasn't just about money. It was about lineage, legacy. A man who spent 4 decades building a kingdom only to watch his heir turn it into a personal ATM. And then there was me. The woman he let walk out. The woman whose name had been on every recovery plan, every emergency protocol, every hard-won partnership. The one who sat across from him when the bank threatened foreclosure and said, "We'll make it work." I wasn't the future. I was just the backup plan, the poison pill. Last resort. And now, as the ashes settled, I was the only one who didn't look surprised. I thought about calling him, just to hear his voice. Just to hear how much older it sounded, but I didn't need to. That 2-word text said more than any apology could, because now he knew who Chad really was, knew who I really was, and that knowledge, that was heavier than any audit report. The coffee shop was one of those generic, post-industrial boxes with reclaimed wood tables and baristas who looked like they'd cry if you ordered a frappuccino. Neutral territory. No logos, no nostalgia, just sterile air and the quiet hiss of an espresso machine behind us. I sat in the corner booth, facing the door. Old habit. He walked in looking like a man halfway through an autopsy. Mr. Albright had always carried himself like the room owed him silence. Even in his 60s, he was the kind of guy who could make an entire boardroom shut up with a slow blink. But not today. Today he looked 10 years older. His hair was thinner, his tan was patchy, and the suit, tailored and expensive, hung off him like grief. The weight of realization does that to a man, especially one who raised the mistake with his own last name. He didn't order coffee, just sat down across from me, eyes heavy, lips thin, no pleasantries, no fake warmth. Just a man dragging a rusted chain of shame behind him, link by link. Between us, he placed a manila folder. No logo, no label, just thick enough to feel important. He pushed it toward me. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "Not sorry, not quite, but it was the closest he'd ever get." I didn't touch the folder. I let it sit there like a loaded weapon. Instead, I looked at him. Really looked. The eyes that once lit up when I saved his company were dull now, sunken into sockets that had seen too much too fast. The boat in the Bahamas, sold. The house in Vermont, mortgage under review. Chad, out, criminally charged. The auditors hadn't just found the skeletons, they'd dragged them into daylight, dressed them in a suit, and subpoenaed them. He laced his fingers together, took a long breath. They want to restructure immediately. Legal actions are moving ahead. There's a cleanup plan, but it needs execution. Someone who knows the bones. I raised an eyebrow, said nothing. "I need you," he said finally, voice cracking under its own weight. Not as a consultant, not as a deputy, as CEO. He looked down when he said it, couldn't even meet my eyes. I finally opened the folder. Inside, a formal proposal, compensation, reinstatement, full authority. It read like a corporate redemption arc, when they wanted me to star in. I closed it slowly, tapped my finger once on the cover. "You really thought he was going to save it, didn't you?" He said nothing. I leaned back in my chair watching him, not with hatred, not even with pity, with clarity. Because this offer, this meeting, this table wasn't justice. It was inheritance by fire. They'd burned the kingdom down, and now they were asking the woman they banished to sift through the ashes and rebuild the throne. I looked at him for a long moment, then said, "You know the thing about a poison pill?" I paused, letting the words linger like smoke. "Sometimes it doesn't just kill the disease. Sometimes it wipes the whole damn system clean. And then, With the folder between us and the silence thick enough to taste, I said, "Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the coffee pot strikes again."